So Nate Heller, you're the composer of "Can You Ever Forgive Me?" This is actually the second score that you've ever composed for a feature-length film. The first one was for your other collaboration with Mario Heller, "Diary of a Teenage Girl." Can you just talk a little bit about what did you learn on that first score that you applied to this second score?
That's a good question. Well, her first movie, Diary of a Teenage Girl, um, that was my first scoring experience ever. So the way that kind of came together was they were shooting the movie, and there was going to be a scene where the characters were in a bar, and there was supposed to be a band playing on stage in the background, and I had written like a little piece of music for that. And appeared during the shoot as an extra, and everyone really seemed to like that song. And then when they got into the edit phase of that movie, Mari sort of tricked me into auditioning by asking me if I wanted to try scoring a scene. And then she took the work that I'd done there, took it to producers and said, "Do you want to score this movie?" At which point I sort of had to swallow the pill of I'm going to need to learn how to do this job. So I would say I definitely learned on that first one, first of all, how this whole process works, because I was completely learning as I went. I would say that I also learned a little bit more about working with my sister and, just the language of communicating about score and how you put into words all those kind of abstract uh, abstract elements of music that you need to somehow verbalize to each other. So I'd say we kind of developed a language to sort of get her what she needed for various work. Um, and yeah, I would say that it gave me a little bit of confidence that I can actually do the work and do the job. So I'd say that's kind of what I brought into the second film.
Well, this is her second feature film as well, so I guess you two are growing and learning together and making great progress, I should say. Tell us a little bit about what your initial ideas were for the score for this movie.
For Can You Ever Forgive Me?
Yes.
Sure. I would say I'm in kind of a unique position, being so close with the director. I don't think that's your typical composer experience. So one of the benefits of that is that I'm able to, sort of see what's coming down the pike for her. So when she signed on to do the movie, pretty early on, I was able to get a look at the script, and there was a lot of mention of artists like Blossom Dearie and these classic kind of jazz singer-songwriter types who those were artists that Lee Israel really idolized, and she sort of lived in that world of music. So that was sort of a jumping off point for me, was knowing that there's going to be a lot of source music um, that's sort of in this realm, and how do I create a score that will be complementary without completely aping the genre. um, and then we also have the benefit of we had the same music supervisor, Howard Parr, on Can You Ever Forgive Me, who also did Diary of a Teenage Girl. So we had some conversations early on about what the source music was going to look like, and it was sort of a collaborative discussion of, should we keep it kind of jazzy? Should it be in contrast? And the spot that we ended was, trying to do something sort of jazz combo focused would probably be the best complement to that kind of world of music that Lee Israel really kind of lived in.
Were you aware of this story before this movie came along? I mean, it's one of those truth is stranger than fiction
It,
tales. I mean, were you
I
aware of
I
it at
was
all?
not familiar with it at all, and I was kind of enthralled by it. And I think there were definitely some kind of questions early on about, is this a heist movie? Is it, is this Mission Impossible? Or is it something else? And I think that it really is a something else kind of story. I kind of think of it as a story about uh, you know, personal introspection and growth and redemption. So at the outset, I was kind of like, how do I wrap my head around this story? What is it? What genre is this movie going to be? And I think as it was being made, I kind of got a better sense of how the story would play out on screen. But I was completely oblivious to Lee Israel prior to getting a hold of this script.
Well, it does strike a very delicate tone, the movie, because I mean, on the one hand, she's committing crimes, but on the other hand, I mean, there is this kind of gleefulness to it in a strange way. I mean, was that a difficult tonal balance to strike in your music?
I would say so. Yeah, I think there's a lot of nuance to the story, and I think the way that Marielle tells stories in general, I think she's drawn to characters like Lee or like Minnie in Diary who don't have don't have clear cut, you know, moral guidelines necessarily. So I think her goal with a lot of her filmmaking is to present present the characters and present their stories and to leave it up to the audience to sort of decide where they land in terms of how they feel about these characters. How does that play into music? I would say, from my perspective, that just means that I'm trying to do as little editorializing as I can, um, and just trying to let the scenes tell me what they need and sort of speak for themselves. So, I would say, like, one scene that kind of sticks out to me as being a little bit challenging there's a scene where Lee invites Jack back to her apartment, and it's a total pigsty. There's like cat turds all over the apartment, and it's pretty gross, and it's kind of shocking to her that she wasn't aware that she was kind of living in squalor. And that's a musical moment in the film as well. So it was tough to kind of strike a balance between something that sort of highlighted how despairing this scene is, but also how hopeful it is that she has a friend who's willing to come in and help her sort of address this and get her life back together. So I think that's the perfect example of a scene where the emotion is not cut and dry. We're sad, we're happy, we're excited. It was sort of a blend of, nuanced feelings. So that was definitely a challenge to strike that balance with some of the score.
You mentioned Jack, played by Richard E. Grant, and I mean, I think that at its core, I mean, this is a really great buddy comedy.
Sure.
It's sort of like one of those odd couple type things where you've got this like prickly pair with this, really slick huckster. Can you talk a bit about, I guess, sort of the different kind of expressing the differences between those two? And I mean, was that something that you were interested in as well? Like,
Yeah, we kind of found during the edit process that aspect of the film, that their relationship was really the thing that makes you excited to watch Lee, because I think watching Lee just on her own is a little disheartening.
right.
I don't know if that's the right word, but uh, she's a challenge on her own. And so when she finds Jack as her complement, I think something sort of switches, and you feel a little bit of this mischievous glee that they sort of go through together. So definitely their relationship inspired the tone of a lot of the music. And there's like a longer stretch of score as the scheme sort of picks up and kicks into gear. And that was definitely sort of influenced by the feeling of their kind of on-screen chemistry and that sort of pep that he brought to the screen.
Right. In terms of, one of the things that we kind of overlook, I think, is that this is a period piece.
Sure.
It's set during a time when we were alive, but
Right,
it's still
right.
a period piece. Was that an important aspect of the film as well, to kind of put you in a specific time and place?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, her first film was also a period piece,
Mhm.
so there was definitely the thought of like, we're in the 70s, how do we make the music reflect this? Do we keep it all in that vein or do we go somewhere else with it? In the case of this movie, I'm like a child of the 90s, so my instincts were like, cool, do I get to make like grunge music for this?
Yeah.
And there's like one small moment that has a little bit of like kind of grunge to it, but for the most part, we talked about Lee being someone who is sort of at odds with the world around her. So even though she's living in 90s New York, and we wanted to cultivate a feeling of New York City and we wanted the music to feel like New York, we also kind of wanted it to be lost in time somewhat. So a pretty strong choice that we made early on was that it was going to be a really human score, you know, and that it was going to be real instruments and that it should sound like people playing music in a room and that it should maybe be a little rough around the edges in some ways. So in terms of doing a period piece set in the 90s, I think it was pretty clear that we didn't want to go too digital with the score in general. We didn't really lean into the 90s feel a whole lot, but I think the idea of kind of crafting this sort of jazzy world of music that Lee's mind could sort of live in was definitely a consideration. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, I mean, she's sort of out of step with the times anyway. So, I mean, it wouldn't make sense for her listening to, I don't know, Nirvana or something like that.
Right, right.
I guess you guys are working on a period piece right now. You're currently doing the Mr. Rogers biopic. Can you tell us anything about that? Have you started work yet on it?
I have started work on that. They just wrapped shooting just about a week or so ago. And there was kind of like a flurry of work to be done pretty early on because there's all of that wonderful kind of, you know, on-set Mr. Rogers music that had to be recreated. So there were about 5 or 6 pieces of music that we squared away leading up to the shoot that were then performed on set. And now we're sort of at the stage between that and the post-production. So just kind of diving into the world of the score for this one as well.
I certainly look forward to seeing that next year, and hopefully
Me too.
talking to you again. Nate Haller, thank you so much for your time. Congratulations on it.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Same here. Have a good one.
Cheers.